You're listening to the Smartest Retirement Show, brought to you by your local financial strategy firm, Accelerated Wealth.
We have legendary Jim Rogers on the show with us. We're going to talk about a gift to my children, a father's lessons for life and investing.
Have you always, you're legendary to have a sit down with you and to be, unless you're Neil Cavuto, you don't get a chance to sit down with you very often.
Jim, thank you for taking your time to be on the show with us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. My pleasure.
You mentioned in the book, Life's Larger Lessons. That's really what this book was about. Can you give me one of the biggest lessons from the book that you were trying to convey to your children?
Well, I have two daughters, and so I said to them, you should always be very skeptical of everything you hear. You should question everything you hear, and you should beware of the boys.
That's great wisdom.
Beware of the boys.
I was a bad boy, Blake, so I know that they need to beware of the boys, but it's really, I try to tell them to work very hard, but the most important thing is to follow your own instincts, your own research, your own skepticism, your own questioning, and then if you come to a conclusion, and especially if you find that everybody else laughs at you or ridicules you, you're probably really onto the right thing, and so just continue following your own passions and not somebody else's.
Take the road less traveled. It made
well,
all
the
the
road
difference.
the road less traveled, especially if other people ridicule you for doing it. Yes, you must follow your own way. Nobody ever was, not many people, or well, I'd say nobody has ever been successful imitating other people's ideas, approaches, whether you're an artist or a writer or sports hero. Just about nobody gets successful following other people.
Right. Yeah, Jim, most of our investors or listeners are the type of folks who are in retirement. They have 401ks, IRAs, and they're probably still getting that same old advice, say, stay the course, everything's going to be okay. What would you tell people like that who are listening about their retirement? What would you tell them today if you were in a room with them?
Well, I would tell you that in my view, the U.S. and the world is going to continue to be in at best a period for another few years where things go sideways. There'll be ups and downs, but, fluctuating within a trading range, if you can use that term, and that unless they're awfully good at stock picking and trading, they should be very leery of stocks in most parts of the world. If they're a good trader, of course, they can make a fortune. But the main thing that they should be leery of is turning over their money to other people who probably will not make money for them, just as the last 10 years have been bad. Unless they can find people like you, Blake, who know what they're doing, they should be very leery of giving their money to other people, and they should invest only in things that they themselves know a lot about. It's horrible earning 1 or 2% on your money right now if it's in cash, but it's even more horrible to lose 1 or 2 or 10% a year because you make bad investments.
Right.
So stay with what you know. Be very careful because the world is going to continue in a precarious state.
So let's continue on that. What is being the legendary investor that you are with all the success you've had on Wall Street, where do you see, and I know you're candid. I saw you on Glenn Beck last week. That's why we wanted you on the show, Jim, is to give truth to our listeners. Where do you really think this market's headed with all the headlines we're reading today about the bad economy?
Well, I will tell you where my investments are. My investments are in raw materials, natural resources, commodities, real assets, you can call them what you will, and foreign currencies. And I have sold short. I own very few stocks around the world. I have sold short emerging market stocks. I have sold short U.S. technology stocks. I've sold short one large American bank, U.S. bank, and I've sold short long-term government bonds in the United States. That's where my money is. Who knows if I'm right or wrong? I usually don't invest for the short term. I never invest for the short term. I'm not any good at it. So I probably will hold these positions for a while.
So, Jim, what you're doing is you're taking a defensive position.
Well, if you consider it defensive, yeah, by all means. Many people wouldn't consider
Okay.
commodities and currencies defensive. I do. I happen to agree with you 100%. But I'm nearly always hedged, Blake, because I know that things can pop out of the air. Who knows that tomorrow afternoon we wouldn't have a gigantic war explode And if so, I want to be protected, and hopefully my shorts would protect me. But I do know that America and other central banks are printing a lot of money, and I think that's going to lead to higher prices, higher inflation for all of us. And so I'm protecting myself with commodities.
Jim, I have to ask, if your daughters were sitting in a conference room with you and asking you, hey, Dad, what do we do with our retirement? How do we start our retirement? What would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them what I have. My children, by the way, have never owned a stock or a bond, Blake. They've only owned commodities all their lives, and needless to say, they're extremely happy only owning commodities. And they have
a good advisor.
Well, they don't own U.S. They don't have. They're Americans, obviously, but they don't have American bank accounts. They have their money in currencies outside of the U.S. dollar because we're very worried about it. And I would tell them to continue to learn about investing in the rest of the world because the United States is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, Blake. In the history of the world, no nation has ever gotten itself into this kind of situation. So I would tell them to continue to learn about investing in other opportunities in other nations because some of those are going to be growing faster than we are. I don't like saying that at all. I'm an American. I vote here. I pay taxes here. But unfortunately, those are facts.
You know, they said actually today on CNBC that the S&P could lose half its value by the end of the year. What are your thoughts on that?
Could? Well, of course, anything could happen. But if it's on CNBC, I'm skeptical. I don't get my advice from CNBC or from the United States government. Those are a couple of sources that I avoid when I'm trying to figure out what to do with my investments. But it could happen. I mean, anything can happen. I'm terrible at short-term trading, Blake, but I suspect that the dollar, the U.S. stock market, which has been going down a lot in the last few weeks, will probably have some kind of burst of selling here in the next week or two. And if it does, I will cover some of my shorts and look for a rally. I mean, any market goes down 6 or 7 weeks in a row or 8 weeks in a row, it usually is the time for a rally. I'm not optimistic that we're going to be in the middle of the beginning of a great new bull market. As I said, I don't own many stocks around the world. But we could have a rally. Things have been beaten down pretty much for 6 weeks in a row, 7 weeks in a row, as you know.
Right. Speaking of rallies, what are the bright spots that you really see political, economy-wise in the next 12 months? What are some things that you're really keyed on that are positive?
Where, in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Probably the most thing that I'm most optimistic about in the world for the next little while is agriculture. Farming is going to be a great profession, a great sector for the next decade or two. Farming has been, and anything to do with agriculture, has been horribly beaten down for 30 years, and farmers are now going to have their day in court. If you don't want to become a farmer, think about buying farmland. If you don't want to buy farmland and you're great at restaurants, open your restaurants in the agricultural area. I mean, all those guys in Iowa and Nebraska are going to be very rich in the next 20 or 30 years. Buy yourself a lake house in Oklahoma. That's where the money's going to be.
Right.
Try to avoid all these financial types like you and me. The money's going to be with the farmers.
Right. Jim, anything else you want to share about your book, A Gift to My Children, that we haven't covered?
Well, it was I've had various and sundry failures and setbacks in my life and various and sundry triumphs. So what I tried to do was write a book so that my children, and it turns out more adults really like it than children,
it's
because
a great book.
It's got so many lessons based on my mistakes and some of my successes. And I want to pass it on to my children, but now it turns out that most adults like it too.
I love what you say up front in the book about, following your own path, getting the right advice, going against the grain. I also love that you wrote a book about, some of it has to do with thought process versus just where to put money, which I think...
Thought process was much, much, much more important than what I was trying to pass on to people and to my daughters. This is not a book for hot tips. This is something that I hope you can read 30 years from now.
Mm. But a lot of our, and that's great because a lot of our listeners, as they head into retirement, even if their assets are well protected, it's not that they need to be retrained, but a lot of times they have to develop that mindset, a different mindset. And so it's a great book for that, in my opinion.
Well, I've learned that it's when most people are thinking the same way, it means most people are not. That somebody's not thinking, and I'm trying to imbue that into my children to think for themselves and to learn to think.
Well, Jim, once again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your book and what you see going on in the economy. We really appreciate you stopping by the show.
Well, thank you, Blake. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Smartest Retirement Show, brought to you by your local financial strategy firm, Accelerated Wealth.